Now, we've talked about rough idle issues on this channel before, but today I want to talk about a little bit of a different problem, and that's fluctuating or surging idle. You know, when the RPM of your car is kind of going up and down really regularly, up and down and up and down, it's kind of like your car can't figure out what speed it wants to run at. Now, this is a problem that you can totally fix yourself. So what's going on with your engine when it's doing this surging thing? Often, it's a problem with the air-fuel mixture in the engine. And your computer is having a tough time compensating for it, and so it's revving up and down. Now, there's a few reasons that are pretty common that this happens, and I'm gonna walk you through each one of them. And stick around, because I'm gonna share with you a fun little procedure that a lot of people don't know about when it comes to any engine idle issue. Okay, so when it comes to these fluctuating idle causes, the first thing I like to do is plug in my trusty car scanner, because this just helps me really zero in on whatever issue it is, and it saves me a bunch of time. Now, if you don't have a scanner, you can still absolutely figure out your fluctuating idle. You just have to use process of elimination to address every potential problem until it's fixed. That said, I would still recommend getting a scanner, and it doesn't have to be a fancy one. They make $20, $30 scanners that have live data that work really great. And we'll put a couple links in the description you can check out. Also, we recently put out a comprehensive comparison video on Bluetooth scanners that you can connect to your smartphone. So check that out, because there's definitely some ones you want to avoid. All right, let's plug this in and get started. I'm gonna start the car and check out the live data. So the first thing I'm gonna check, and what is a very common issue for fluctuating idle, is the mass airflow sensors. Okay, so here's my airflow rate section. And this is data coming in from the mass airflow sensor. And this is often in grams per second. And the range that you want to see is from 2 to 8 grams per second. And if anything's outside of that range in an extreme way, or if it's fluctuating super fast or totally dead, obviously I'm going to suspect a dirty or dead mass airflow sensor. So if your scanner indicated a mass airflow problem, this is where the mass airflow sensor is. And there's a couple things that you can do to address this. One, you can clean the sensor, so you can pull the sensor out, get some mass airflow specific cleaner, and give it a good cleaning, and sometimes that'll bring it back. Other times, if it's just a dead sensor, you're gonna need to go ahead and replace it. Okay, so the next live data section I wanna check out is my fuel trims, and there's gonna be a short-term and a long-term fuel trim. And if you have a V6 or a V8, you're gonna have a bank 1 and 2, so you wanna make sure that you check out all 4 in that case. So the values that you're looking for are -10 to +10%. Anything outside of that range is going to indicate a rich or a lean condition that the computer is having to compensate for. If you have a number that's lower than -10, that just means the computer's holding back fuel because there's not enough air. Something like a clogged air filter would do that. Okay, if you're getting funky numbers in your fuel trims, one major thing you want to check for is vacuum leaks, because vacuum leaks are a really big cause for fluctuating idle. It's essentially when there's air getting into your engine in an area that it's not supposed to, and it totally throws off the computer. The first thing that I usually do to check for vacuum leaks is a visual inspection. So I'm checking air hoses, especially, you know, the big intake hose here and any air hoses connected to it. And then all over the engine, there's these rubber hoses that carry air. You want to check for cracks, for disconnections, just general leaks, and that's a good way to find big ones. If you can't see anything, then you would move on to the harder to find leaks, and you'll use like a carb cleaner, and you're gonna spray around the engine while the engine's at idle. You're gonna spray around those hoses, and if the idle speed dramatically changes, you know that you might have a vacuum leak in that area. Obviously, don't be spraying this stuff on hot exhaust parts. That would be a bad idea. Okay, next section I'm gonna look up is the absolute throttle position. And that's essentially where your throttle in the engine is set to. And it should be at idle fixed, usually in a range from like 5 to 18%, somewhere in there. If you have values that are wildly outside of that range, or they're jumping around a lot, it means something could be going on with your throttle body. So another very common reason for fluctuating idle is a dirty idle air control valve, IAC, or a dirty throttle body. And the newer cars, the idle control is actually integrated into the throttle body, so the newer cars don't actually have an IAC. Essentially, the best way to handle this is to pull off the main air hose, remove the throttle body from the intake, and give it a good cleaning with some carb cleaner. Just as a note, when you are cleaning a throttle body, you want to avoid moving that throttle butterfly. You just want to clean both sides of it, because if you move it, you can run the risk of screwing up your idle setting. Now, while I'm under the hood, there would normally be a couple things that I'd be checking. if this were a rough idle versus a fluctuating idle. And that would be engine mounts and transmission fluid. But because those are never the reason for fluctuating idle, we can skip them. Next section I'm going to check is the engine coolant temperature. This is important because if the temp sensor goes bad, the computer doesn't know what temperature the engine's at, and it can like kick it into like a startup loop, and you can get funny idle fluctuations there. So what you want to see is something between 180 degrees to 210 degrees once the engine's warmed up. The big thing I'd be looking for is like a totally dead value, like 0 degrees, meaning that that sensor is bad. Because the next thing I'm going to check is oxygen sensors, specifically the upstream oxygen sensors. If you have a 4-cylinder, it's going to be just one on one bank, and if you have a V6 or V8, you'll probably have 2 of them, 2 different banks. So on this car, I have 2 banks, and different cars can have different styles of oxygen sensors and give different readouts. So it can be a little confusing, but what I find is helpful is I go for the section in my scanner that talks about the ratios or the lambda, and those numbers are generally pretty universal. And so what you're looking for there is you want it to be hovering around 1, going down to 0 or up to 2 is sort of your range. What I'm looking for here is mostly that it's sticking in that healthy range, not going too far low or too far above, and also that it's actually alive, that I see the numbers switching up slightly, so I know that the sensor is active versus a totally dead sensor is just going to be flatlining at 0 or whatever. Hey, while I'm thinking about it, if you're enjoying this content, go ahead and subscribe to Budget Mechanic. We are always trying to increase our production value, put out more videos, and every subscription really helps. Now that brings us to a few items that are less likely to be the cause of a surging idle, but worth checking out anyway. The first one that you want to check is your alternator voltage. When an alternator starts to fail, it causes the battery to die, and that can potentially cause the electronics in your car to run really weird and cause fluctuating idle. Now most scanners, including the one that I was just using, will give you the battery voltage when the car is running, which tells you what the alternator is putting out. If you don't have a scanner that does that, or you don't have a scanner at all, you can use just a simple multimeter to test the battery while the car is running, and anything above 13.5 volts means that your alternator is good. Now if you don't have either a scanner or a multimeter, you want to get yourself over to an auto parts store that offers free battery and alternator testing, and they can tell you there. Now, sometimes a gummed up fuel system, whether that's fuel lines or injectors, can cause an idle problem like this. And so usually what I do is I'll go out and get a high quality fuel additive, a fuel cleaner, and put that in with a tank of gas. Again, pretty unlikely to cause fluctuating idle, but it's cheap and worth a shot. Last thing you can check is your spark plugs and coils, because while this is very unlikely to be the cause of surging idle, it never hurts to check and replace your spark plugs because they're cheap to do. And with your coils, what I'll often do is get a couple new ones, put them in, and see if the problem changes at all. And if it doesn't, I'll just return them. Fun fact, back in the day, cars used to have a cable between the gas pedal and the throttle on the engine, whereas nowadays, it's all run by electronics. If the calibration between the gas pedal and the engine gets off, you can run into problems. And that can happen, say, if you replace your battery or if you're cleaning or replacing a throttle body, just like we were doing to try to find that surging idle issue. And when that happens, you may need to do a throttle relearn procedure. And that's going to be different for every car, but sometimes it's things like turning the key off and on, shifting into drive, back into park, brake, it can be a whole bunch of different things. On a lot of newer cars, that throttle relearn procedure can be done just with a scanner, which is pretty convenient. Have you ever stepped on the gas in your car and it just hesitates or doesn't seem like it has any power? Well, we recently made a video on just this issue. You should check it out.